So we have seen a Russian drone strike a residential building in Galați in Romania, a NATO state, an EU member state, and there is a lot of the fog of war surrounding exactly what has happened. Does this represent an escalation, a huge escalation by the Kremlin by purposely targeting a civilian object? There were some injuries, thankfully no confirmed deaths so far. I'm filming this the day after the attack. Or was it just purely an accident or a malfunction or hit by maybe Ukrainian air defense and then veered off course and went 15 or 16 kilometers into Romania? So if you've been watching this channel in the last few weeks, you'll see I've talked a lot about as Russia loses this war and it becomes clearer and clearer to the Kremlin, to the Russian public, to the international community, there will be very likely more and more escalation by Vladimir Putin because he is in a very difficult position. Number one, to stay in power, and number two, to win this war, which is effectively very small possibility at this point if you look at his stated objectives and how far away he is from them, and the trajectory of the war, which is against them as Ukraine stalls Russian advances on the front line and the Russian economy gets weaker and weaker to finance the war. Now, I have been discussing how Vladimir Putin may escalate. He may attack a NATO member state. He may threaten to use nuclear weapons. There could be a nuclear accident at the occupied Ukrainian power plant by Russia in the Zaporizhia, just across from the town of Zaporizhia in the occupied part of Ukraine by Russia. There are many different escalation points that Russia has at this juncture. With respect to an escalation with a NATO country, I had outlined that perhaps a limited incursion into a state like, we'll take an example, Estonia or Latvia, grabbing a town, doing a little bit what Russia did when they seized Crimea, denying that those troops are there, no insignia, and then seeing the response from NATO. Would they actually eject those Russian soldiers or not? Or would Russia be able to use it as leverage at some point? Now, what we saw yesterday was a Russian drone that was attacking Ukraine ostensibly and then suddenly veered into Romania, either on purpose or because of a malfunction, or it was hit by Ukrainian air defense. Now that is the story that has been given by the Romanian President Dan. He said probably it was hit by Ukrainian air defense and then veered into NATO territory. So far, Romania has not, at least as I'm going to air here, has not invoked even Article 4, never mind Article 5 of NATO, which is basically that they have been attacked and they're expecting that the other allies come to their aid. Now that is quite convenient for the NATO state to avoid a debate over whether they've been attacked or not, especially because no one was killed in this attack, but it would represent a major escalation by Russia if it were deliberate. Now, Russia themselves have basically given so many mixed messages, it's very hard to know in this fog of war what is even their story. Putin seems to be denying that he knows anything about it. And then you have Medvedev, the former Russian president, basically threatening EU countries that to expect more of these incidents and attacks because they support Ukraine, and basically indicating that this will be deliberate in nature. So whilst we have this fog of war, and it is at this point hard to know exactly which was the cause of the drone going into Galați. It's not that close to the border. It's about 15 kilometers. If you look at where that apartment block was and where the Ukrainian border is, and that's a long way for a drone to travel if it was hit by Ukrainian air defense, that it would just wander around for 15 kilometers and then hit, a high-rise building. Plausible, but very unlikely, I would say. So either Russia has decided to have plausible deniability and deliberately attack a NATO member state to see as they raise the level of escalation. We've seen last year, obviously, the drones that entered Poland that weren't armed. We've seen drones in the last few weeks. There are essentially Ukrainian drones that have been either diverted by Russian air defense, or in fact actually Ukrainian drones that were captured and then fired in by Russia, and now we see then hit a civilian building. So definitely there is an escalation ramping up. Whether it is actually calculated by the Kremlin or just opportunistic, that they see this accident happen and then they jump on it in terms of threatening more, like Medvedev did. In any case, we can expect to see more and more escalation and more of these kind of incidents, as Medvedev has stated, because Russia is losing this war and they will become increasingly desperate, the leadership, to find a way to gain leverage as it becomes clearer and clearer to the Russian public and the Russian elites that they don't have a path to victory. And this may be in the form of more drone incidents or maybe more open attacks to test how much they can push the NATO's countries before there's a reaction. We could see some sort of incursion somewhere in a NATO state, very limited one to expect, not a full blown invasion. They don't have the troops for that. While the fighting is going on here in Ukraine, we could see more nuclear threats from Russia. We could see threats to cause accidents at nuclear facilities like in occupied Ukraine. So we got the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant that's currently occupied by the Russian Federation, illegally obviously with this whole illegal war. So we can definitely foresee more and more of this happening. It is unprecedented to see civilian injuries by a Russian attack that either was diverted by Ukrainian air defense, as the Romanian president said, probably happened. That would be a convenient way to avoid having to invoke Article 4 or Article 5, which Romania has not done so far, and to basically sweep it under the carpet. Or it's actually true that it was hit by the Ukrainian air defense, although I find it odd that it would travel 15 kilometers afterwards through Romanian airspace and not be shot down or anything. That's the first thing that's very strange. And then that it hit this civilian building. Watch this space. We're going to see more and more of it, unfortunately, as Russia loses this war. I don't expect the Kremlin to suddenly announce that they're willing to negotiate in sincerity and seek an end to the war, or to admit defeat and go home for now. But as I've been here at the Black Sea Security Conference, the title was The End Game with a question mark. And that is what we have been discussing here. I'll be discussing that further, giving you a few of my insights that I've gained from the last 2 days here in Odessa at the Security Forum. But that is something, in terms of the framing, that I'm not the only one who's saying that 2027 seems to be where a lot of the analysts are thinking that this war will come to some sort of either conclusion or a pause in the fighting. So on that note, I will say do побачення from Odessa for today. Unfortunately, the weather has changed a little bit, so it's a little bit colder than it was yesterday. It doesn't feel like summer anymore, but nonetheless, I will see you in the next video. Slava Ukraini, do перемоги!